First, listen to this song without shell voicings. Now with shell voicings. I don't know about you, I like the second version a lot better. And obviously I didn't just change the voicing in my left hand, I changed the rhythmic approach. But that's part of the point. Shell voicings remove one note from a 4-note chord, and they make for a much lighter and more agile chord voicing that we can play with our left hand. If you're trying to play jazz standards like this alone at the piano and you feel like there's always something a little off about your left hand, this might be the missing piece. So I'll teach you exactly what I just played in 3 steps, and by the end you'll understand how to apply the concept of shell voicings to any piece of your own. Step 1, you want to make sure you can play the root position chords in your left hand. We're particularly interested in the situation where you want to play melody in your right hand and chords in your left. So start by just getting those chords in your left hand. In this case, it's going to look like this. For these 4 7th chords. I intentionally chose a really simple chord progression as far as, jazz chord progressions go. And we can label the chord tones within each of these chords based on the root note of the chord. So for the A minor 7 chord, I would call these chord tones 1, 3, 5, and 7. And that same logic applies to the other chords. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. For whatever song you're playing, that's your first step. Make sure you can play the root position chords in your left hand. And if that's hard for you, you might be the kind of student who's trying to play songs with tricky chords like this, but every time you come to an unfamiliar chord, you have to rebuild it from scratch. If that's you, a more sensible way to go about things is to build up your chord knowledge week over week, the way that you might with a good private teacher. You could also do it more affordably by becoming a member at pianofluency.com. That's what I do for students in my membership program. It's worked for hundreds of students. It can work for you. We give you assignments every week, and you gradually improve playing chords without having to think about them so much. Now for step 2, once you've gone through the hard work of finding all these root position chords in your left hand, the good news is that playing these shell voicings is actually easier. We're leaving out one of the notes. Instead of playing 1, 3, 5, 7 for each of these chords, now I just play 1, 3, 7. I leave out the 5th. Now, why do we want to do this? A good example in this song comes on the G7. Listen closely. When I play G7 in this part of the piano, it sounds pretty muddy. The notes are all close together. There's a lot of tension in this chord anyway. And when I play it that low, it's getting really dense and not very pleasing to the ear. I could play it an octave higher, and we don't really have that same problem, but we run into the melody. We run into where the right hand is trying to play the melody to fly me to the moon. So let's leave out one of the notes in the chord. And in this part of the piano, it still is kind of a dense, muddy sounding chord, and I'll give you some solutions for that in a moment. But it's definitely an improvement over the full 4-note root position chord if we leave out the 5th. So now I can play the first phrase of Fly Me to the Moon, leaving out the 5th on all of the chords. And I like that a lot better than when we have the 5th in with all those chords. It's just lighter sounding, and it doesn't take away attention from the right hand as much. Why is it we leave out the 5th out of our choices when we have 4 notes in the chord, root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th? Why is the 5th the chord tone that we often leave out for these shell voicings? Well, the 5th is the chord tone most closely related to the root note of the chord. It's actually contained within the sound of the root note of the chord as part of something called the overtone series. And you can hear that when we play the root and the fifth together, they're very consonant. They almost sort of fold into each other as one sound. Meanwhile, with the third and the seventh, adding those notes in really has an impact on the sound of the chord and the overall harmony of the song. So we can get away with leaving out the fifth, and we're not going to have a big impact on the overall feeling of the harmony, the feeling of the chord changes as we move through the song. So already with this notion that you can just leave out the fifth on any major 7, dominant 7, or minor 7 chord, you can make a big improvement to your two-handed arrangements of songs from lead sheets, jazz standards like you might find in the real book. Just leave out the fifth on every single chord, and you'll find that there's kind of more room to breathe in your chord arrangements. If you want to go even further, and you want to get closer to what I played at the start of the video, we need to introduce a concept called voice leading. With voice leading, we're looking for a smooth movement from one chord to the next for each of the chord tones. So when we go from D minor 7 to G dominant 7, if we imagine 3 singers taking those notes, in this approach, they're all jumping around a lot, and they have kind of awkward intervals to sing. Better voice leading would do this. In order to do that, what I did was I inverted the top 2 notes of my shell voicing. Instead of playing 1, 3, 7 for the G dominant 7 chord, I played 1, 7, 3. For most people, myself included, this is really hard to play with one hand. So I've got a solution for that for you in a moment. But first, listen to the sound of this and listen how well it works. As opposed to that's the impact of good voice leading. And if your hand is big enough, you should go ahead and try to play through chord progressions this way. A lot of times in typical jazz chord progressions, you'll be moving around the circle of fifths, which means that it works really well to switch off between these 2 inversions of the shell voicing, 1, 3, 7 and 1, 7, 3. You can kind of just keep switching off as you move through a chord progression with your left hand. And if your hand is big enough to do that, you can get so much mileage out of playing chords in that way. Right? If I were to do it just on this first phrase of Fly Me to the Moon, I can just about handle it with my left hand. I have a stub thumb in my left hand, which makes this harder than it would be, but I've stretched my hand out a lot over the years. So let's give it a shot. Pretty nice. So if your hand is big enough, go ahead and take that approach. For the mere mortals among us, which I would include myself in that group, if it's really hard to reach that octave plus a third, we call it a tenth, you're a normal person. Don't worry about it too much. We have some other solutions for you. So what I might suggest you do is whenever it's convenient, switch off between 1, 3, 7 and 5, 7, 3. And that's what you heard me do at the beginning of the video. I'll start like this on the A minor 7, and then I'm going to use 5, 7, 3 on the G dominant 7 chord. So what we've done is we've taken that same principle of inversion of the 3, 7 going to 7, 3 and back, 3, 7. But now instead of the root note on the G7 chord, we're playing the fifth of the chord. And remember, the fifth is closely related to the root. So we can get away with this. This is a bigger change to the sound of the chord progression than the other adjustments we've made so far. But if you're playing alone at the piano, you can totally get away with it. You know, your audience will be sort of imagining the sound of that bass note in their heads. And it makes it much easier to play physically, which often is the best choice when you're writing an arrangement. So let's review our 3 steps. First, we played through this passage with root position chords in our left hand. Then we left out the fifth. and that helped alleviate some of the muddiness. Then we looked for better voice leading, and specifically, I did that just by replacing 5, 7, 3 for the chord voicing in the G dominant 7 chord. You can apply those same steps to any jazz standard. And this is really useful for the situation where you want to play melody in your right hand and give all of the chord playing job to the left hand. And honestly, that's the first arrangement approach that I suggest for most students. It's easier to handle cognitively than trying to split up chord tones between the two hands. And unless you have a very slow moving melody, it's going to be easier also than trying to put the chord tones in your right hand and just play bass in your left. For one final bonus step to get you all the way to the arrangement I played at the top of the video, add in quarter notes in your left hand. And when we talk about, they're feeling like there's a missing piece in your arrangements of songs you play from the real book, rhythm is actually usually the biggest factor for a lot of adult students. It is really helpful to know about things like shell voicings because they can make it more practical to play with this kind of rhythm. But as soon as you're able to, it's great to experiment with something like a quarter note pulse in your left hand because we're trying to replicate the sound of a jazz rhythm section when we're playing alone at the piano. And a good way to do that is to play quarter notes because that's what an upright bass player might be playing. This is also kind of the foundation of stride piano, which is much more difficult. Right. With that, we have this oompa pattern jumping back and forth. Rhythmically, though, a stride left hand is just based around quarter notes. So this kind of static, playing one chord in quarter notes, this approach is a great approach for students to practice the coordination of quarter notes in the left hand, swing in the right hand. And I have a lot of fun with this approach. It's one of my favorite ways to play solo piano. It's pretty heavily influenced by the jazz pianist Errol Garner, who played a lot of quarter note stabs in his left hand like this. And you can really have fun with kind of pushing and pulling against the rhythm of that steady left hand with your right hand. So play around with that with this song. You can start very simply. And then maybe do a little bit of this improvisation like I'm doing. I'm pretty much just using the same notes, but I'm playing around with different rhythms and little grace notes and repeated notes. And the last thing I did was surrounding the sixth of this C major chord with 7, sharp 5, 6. And that's a fun little lick that you can use. And that's it for our look into shell voicings, told through the lens of this 4-measure section at the beginning of Fly Me to the Moon. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And as always, you can consider becoming a member at pianofluency.com. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.